She stood barefoot in the dirt, her belly swollen, her eyes empty, and her wrists still bruised from the ropes her own mother had tied. Behind her, a rusted wagon disappeared into dust, driven by the very woman who'd just sold her child for $20 and didn't even look back. The man who took her and wasn't looking for anyone. His heart had been buried years ago with the wife he lost and the child he never got to hold. But something about this broken girl, this pregnant stranger left like trash at his doorstep, stirred a part of him he thought was long dead. He had no idea what she carried inside her. No idea that the baby growing in her belly would expose a truth so dark, so haunting, that it would bring the strongest man he knew, himself, crashing to his knees. What did the girl hide behind her silence? Why did her eyes flinch every time someone showed her kindness? And what secret did her unborn child hold that would change not just one life, but 3? Stay with me, because this story will break your heart and then mend it in the most unexpected way. Before we begin this heart-wrenching journey, if stories like these move your soul, if you believe in the power of compassion and second chances, then please take a moment to subscribe to Legacy Ignited, hit the like button, and follow for more unforgettable stories that echo deep within the heart. Your support helps keep these voices alive and these untold stories burning bright. The wind howled across the open plains as Jeremiah Blake, a rugged rancher in his late 40s, stood alone on his porch, gazing at the horizon. Life had been nothing but silence and dust since his wife passed 6 years ago. No children, no laughter, just the creak of old wood and the lonely groan of wind through barbed wire. He wasn't looking for company. He wasn't looking for anything. But on a cold March morning, something found him. It began when a rusted wagon creaked down the dirt road, pulled by a tired mule. In the back sat a girl, barely 16, with matted hair, hollow eyes, and a bulging belly beneath the threadbare dress. Her wrists were bruised, her lips chapped, and fear clung to her like frost. The woman driving the wagon stepped down, a sour-faced hag with clenched fists and eyes sharp as broken glass. "You the rancher," she barked. "You got coin." Jeremiah frowned, stepping closer. "What's this about?" "She's pregnant. Useless to me now. Eats more than she's worth. I'm selling her off. You want to help her, a cook, a warm body at night. You won't find better for the price. $20, and she's yours." Jeremiah stared at her, stunned. "You're selling your own daughter?" The woman spat into the dirt. "Don't look at me like that. She's nothing but trouble. Send herself into that belly. If you don't take her, someone else will, and they won't ask half as kindly." Jeremiah looked at the girl. She didn't speak. Her eyes didn't plead. It was as if her spirit had already died. The child inside her squirmed beneath her dress, the only sign of life left in her body. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was the way the wind paused, the way the light hit her face just then. Maybe it was something deeper, an ache he'd buried too long. Without another word, he reached into his coat, pulled out the money, and handed it over. The woman grabbed the cash and didn't even look back. The wagon disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving the girl standing barefoot in the gravel. Jeremiah cleared his throat. "You hungry?" She nodded faintly. "Come inside," he said gently. "You don't owe me anything. You're not a servant. You're safe here." She followed him inside, limping slightly. He noticed a faint tear in her dress and a bloodstain that hadn't dried. She hadn't seen a doctor, hadn't eaten well, hadn't slept safe in God knows how long. He fixed her soup, placed a blanket around her shoulders, and lit a fire. Still, she said nothing. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She stared into the flames. Then, barely audible, "Clara." Days turned into weeks. Clara barely spoke, but she listened. She cleaned the kitchen without being asked. She fed the chickens. She brushed the horses with shaking hands. Her body was frail, but her movements held a quiet purpose, like she was trying to repay something she didn't believe she deserved. Jeremiah kept his distance, never touched her, never asked questions. But at night, he'd hear her crying, softly, muffled under the old quilt he'd given her, crying for someone, or something. One morning, he found her collapsed in the barn, clutching her belly, breath ragged. Panic surged through him as he carried her into the house. She was going into labor. No hospitals, she gasped. No doctors. He didn't argue. He boiled water, laid out towels, prayed under his breath. Hours passed. She screamed into the mattress, blood soaking the sheets, sweat pouring from her face. But she never asked for help, never begged. She fought like she'd done it all before alone. And then, finally, silence. A child's cry broke through the stillness. Jeremiah held his breath. He turned and saw Clara holding a baby girl, her eyes wide, filled not with joy but terror. She stared at the infant like it was a ghost, like it wasn't supposed to be here. He stepped forward slowly. "She's healthy. You did good, Clara." Clara didn't speak. Her hands trembled. Her eyes stayed locked on the baby, like she expected it to disappear. He took the child gently, wrapped her in a blanket, and whispered, "You're safe now, little one." Clara closed her eyes and passed out. Later that night, when she awoke, Jeremiah sat beside her with the baby asleep in his arms. "You should rest," he said. "She's okay." Clara looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. Then, in a whisper, "You don't understand." Jeremiah frowned. "Understand what?" She stared at the fire, her voice hollow. "That child isn't just mine." He felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" Clara shook her head. "When I was 13, my mother, she started selling me to men. Strangers, neighbors, anyone with coin." Jeremiah's hands clenched. "She said I was cursed, that I owed her for being born. Every night she sold me, and every morning she'd tell me I was lucky she kept me alive." Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't sob. Her voice stayed eerily calm. "When I got pregnant, she didn't care. Just raised the price." Jeremiah looked at the baby, then back at Clara. "Do you know who the father is?" Clara laughed bitterly. "There were too many. She didn't care if I was bleeding, if I screamed. She said silence earned more tips." Jeremiah's chest tightened. Clara continued, voice cracking now. "But this baby, she's not a burden. She's proof. Proof I survived. Proof I'm not what my mother said I was." She turned to Jeremiah, eyes burning with something fierce. "But I'm terrified, because I don't know how to love her. I don't know what love is. I've never felt it." Jeremiah knelt beside her, eyes wet. "You will. I promise you, Clara. You already are." She looked at the baby again, this time with something different. Fear, yes, but also awe. And in that moment, Jeremiah realized something he hadn't expected. The miracle wasn't just a child. It was Clara. Jeremiah stayed by Clara's side that entire night. The baby curled peacefully against his chest. The fire had dimmed to glowing embers, casting soft shadows across the wooden floor. But inside the rancher's heart, something had begun to burn brighter than ever. A sense of purpose he thought he'd buried years ago. Clara slept in broken stretches, waking every so often with wide, startled eyes. But each time she stirred, she saw Jeremiah still there. He didn't leave. He didn't ask questions. And for the first time in her life, that steady presence began to stitch something back together inside her. A tiny thread of trust. The days passed in quiet rhythm. Clara named the baby Hope, not because she believed in it yet, but because she desperately wanted to. The name felt like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Jeremiah taught her how to hold the baby without fear, how to change her, soothe her cries, and wrap her tight against her chest. Hope never fussed much. She seemed to know she was safe now. Still, Clara rarely smiled. Something lingered in her eyes, something deeper than pain, a shadow Jeremiah couldn't quite reach. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled across the hills, Clara stood at the edge of the barn, staring out at the storm. Her hands trembled, and when Jeremiah approached, she flinched like she'd been touched by lightning. "I'm not scared of you," she said softly, eyes fixed on the rain. "I'm scared of what's still inside me." Jeremiah stood beside her without speaking. She continued, voice distant. "You think the worst already happened, that being sold by my mother was the bottom of it, but it wasn't." She paused, her breath shaky. "There's something else, something I've never told anyone. Not even when the doctor stitched me up. Not when the priest asked if I'd sinned. I thought if I kept it buried, it'd die. But it didn't. Jeremiah turned to her. Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw the full weight of her torment rise to the surface. 2 months before she sold me to you, Clara whispered. I tried to kill the baby. The words hit Jeremiah like a hammer. I found a root in the forest. Someone told me it would make the pain stop. I didn't want her to grow up the way I did. Trapped, broken, hated. I thought ending it would save her. But when I took it, nothing happened. She just kicked harder, as if she was fighting me from the inside. Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks, her voice cracking like thunder overhead. That's the miracle, Jeremiah. That's what you don't know. I tried to destroy her, and she still chose to live. Jeremiah couldn't breathe. He looked down at little Hope, sleeping peacefully in the cradle he'd carved from old cedar. A child born from violence, fear, and betrayal, yet filled with nothing but calm. And that's why I can't hold her sometimes, Clara said. Because I remember what I almost did. I remember the poison, the rage, the shame. And yet, every time she looks at me, she just blinks those tiny eyes like I'm the only thing she trusts. Jeremiah stepped forward. His voice was low, but steady. Clara, what you did, what you survived, would have broken most people. But you're still here. You chose to give birth. You chose to name her Hope. And you stayed, even when running might have been easier. He knelt slowly before her, eyes filled with something between sorrow and awe. I've seen animals give up on their young. I've seen men walk away from family. But you held on to life when everything in you screamed to let go. And that makes you braver than anyone I've ever known. Clara's hands flew to her mouth. Her knees buckled. She collapsed into the straw at the barn's edge, sobbing so hard it sounded like her soul was being torn in two. And Jeremiah fell to his knees beside her, not out of pity, not out of guilt, but because, in that moment, he realized the real miracle wasn't just the child, it was the mother who had every reason to become a monster, yet chose to be something better. He reached for her hand, holding it gently, grounding her in the storm. I don't care where you came from, Clara. I care where you're going. And I believe you're not just a survivor. You're a mother now. A real one. And hope she's lucky to have you. The storm outside began to fade. The thunder softened. The rain slowed to a whisper. Weeks passed. Clara changed. She began humming while washing dishes. She smiled when Hope cooed. She told Jeremiah stories from before everything went dark. Memories of picking wildflowers and catching frogs in the river. Her laugh was timid, but real. Hope began to grow strong. Her eyes sparkled with mischief. She loved Jeremiah's deep voice and would reach for his beard with tiny fingers. Then one morning, Clara came to the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. One for her, one for Jeremiah. She looked out over the land and whispered, I want to stay. Jeremiah nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Later that week, while tending the horses, Clara found something buried beneath the barn floorboards. An old box, nailed shut, filled with Jeremiah's past. Letters from his late wife. Baby clothes folded and never used. A single photograph of a crib that had remained empty. He never told Clara what he'd lost, and she never asked. But she understood, now, why he'd taken her in. Why he'd stayed by her side. Why he looked at Hope like she was something holy. They were 3 broken pieces, somehow fitting together. One night, under the stars, Clara placed baby Hope in Jeremiah's arms and said softly, You're the only father she's ever known. His eyes brimmed with tears, and in that quiet moment, with the prairie wind brushing past, he looked down at the child who wasn't his by blood, but by every other bond, and whispered, You saved us, little one. And finally, the house that had known nothing but silence for so long echoed with life again. That night, long after Clara and Hope had gone to sleep, Jeremiah sat alone by the fire. The ranch was quiet, the wind still, but inside him, something stirred that he hadn't felt in years, peace. He stared at the small pair of booties in his hand, the same ones he'd carved 2 decades ago for a child who never came. His wife had miscarried late in pregnancy. The loss broke them both. She never recovered, and after her passing, Jeremiah never let anyone close again. Until Clara. Until Hope. The booties felt different now. Not like a symbol of what was lost, but of what had somehow been returned. He stood and walked to Clara's room. The door was cracked open. Inside, she lay curled around Hope, both of them breathing slow, steady, safe. The baby stirred slightly, then reached up in her sleep, her tiny hand resting against Clara's chest. Jeremiah's throat tightened. He stepped back, not wanting to wake them, but Clara's voice, soft as a breath, reached him. "Jeremiah." He paused. She sat up, cradling Hope. "Why did you really take me in?" He hesitated, then stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on the child. "Because I saw myself in you. Lost, wounded, alone, but also something still alive in your eyes. Something fighting. I guess. I needed to believe that broken things could still become whole." Clara nodded slowly. Then she reached into a drawer and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside was the old silver locket her mother had once ripped from her neck when she was a child. She handed it to Jeremiah. "This was the last thing my father gave me before he disappeared. I never knew what was inside. I was always too scared to open it." Jeremiah opened it gently. Inside was a tiny photo, faded with time. A man holding a newborn, his face joyful, beaming with love. On the other side, etched in trembling handwriting, "For Clara, you are wanted. You are loved." Tears slipped down Clara's cheeks. All these years, she had believed she was unwanted, cursed, forgotten. But she was wrong, and that truth hit her so hard, it felt like her soul cracked wide open. Jeremiah placed the locket around her neck, fastening the clasp slowly, like sealing a vow. "You always were more than what they did to you," he said softly. "You were never the shame. You were the miracle." Clara buried her face in Hope's hair, sobbing quietly, and for once not from pain. The next morning, the sun rose brighter. The land looked the same, but everything had changed. Hope giggled in the yard. Clara walked barefoot through the grass, finally free. And Jeremiah? He stood at the fence, watching them, hat in hand, heart full. He hadn't just saved a girl. He'd found the one thing he thought life had stolen forever: a family. Thank you for watching this story to the very end. If it touched your heart even a little, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it. Because sometimes a single story is all it takes to remind us that even in the darkest moments, miracles are still possible. Until next time, this is Legacy Ignited, where every soul has a story.